Sure. So thanks, Hannah, and welcome everyone. We've got a great session today. So very happy to introduce Christian Volpe-Martinkus, who's Principal Economist at IADB. I've known Christian for a while, actually. I think we met when I was still living in DC, which is some time ago now. And so Christian has been doing great work on international trade for a long time. And I think he's one of those people who gets really at the sweet spot of doing really nice research with great data and rigorous methods, but also speaking to questions that are really important to policymakers and policy professionals. So I've always really enjoyed his work, and I'm sure today is going to be no exception. Then I'll also introduce Andrea, who's going to be doing the discussion comments. So Andrea Lassman, who's Professor of International Economic Policy at University of Mainz. And again, I think it's going to help us get at that spot that we are hoping to get to with the webinars, which is to say getting top research, but also talking a lot about the policy implications and what it really means. So with that, I'll hand over to Christian. Thanks for joining us.
Just one really quick thing, Ben, right? So that we are recording today.
We are
recording. So that everyone is aware of that. So that's the format, and we will be posting this on our website once we're done. Please, we will be running out of time. We always do because it's so exciting. So in terms of being efficient, please use the chat box, and then Ben has this superpower of collecting the questions really well. And so we'll try to get to as much of it as possible. So without further ado, sorry, Christian, go ahead.
No, thank you very much, Hannah and Ben for the introduction and for organizing this seminar series, which is great. And thank you for the kind words. Are you looking well? So are you seeing well the screen, no?
Yes.
Good. So today we'll talk about trade promotion and firms exports. And there is a subtitle there, which is Beyond the Direct Effects. So that would be the last part of the presentation. I would like to share with you some research that we have been doing over the years with Jerónimo and with Ignacio. Especially at the end of the presentation, I will focus on a new paper we are working on right now, which has to do precisely with the indirect effects of export promotion. So let me start by saying something that we know, but let us put some numbers on this. So we know that exporting firms are few, but they are very important in the economies. Let's take, for example, the case of Uruguay, which is the country we'll focus on at the end of the presentation. Exporting firms in Uruguay make up only 2.5% of the total number of firms that register sales and purchases in the country. But these firms represent approximately 30% of their total values and account for more than 15% of the total employment. So we are talking about a small number of firms that make up a big part of the economy. Now, there are few. The question you may ask is, why exporting firms are few? There are significant barriers, a lot of barriers. And none of us, I mean, at least I'm not an entrepreneur, I don't own a firm, but when you talk to the people who own a firm, they will tell you there are a lot of barriers. Imagine that you need to sell something abroad. Then you need to know about the tariffs. Then you need to know about how to enter a specific export markets. So what are the shipping costs? What are the options? What's the demand profile in the markets? Are there any entry requirements? If I want to sell the product in a particular country, what are the distribution channels? And more importantly, even, is the fact that they want to know what's the initial specific business contact. Whom should I talk to? That's the main question they have. When trade promotion organizations, and we'll talk about later, these entities, ask firms what's the single most important piece of information they need to start with is, okay, what's my business contact, Alvaro? Who could be a potential partner for me? And that's one of the major barriers that firms face when they try to sell abroad, the lack of information. There are others, of course, and we know them and have been explored. Ben has done a lot of research also on those, transport costs, there are tariffs, there are administrative costs associated with the procedures at the borders. There are many of those. But the barrier we will talk about today is information barriers. frictions. So now imagine that firms now can gather this information by their own. The problem with that is that that information can spill over other firms. No, it's hard to exclude third parties from information, and everybody can use information. So there is a potential for free riding when a firm finds a potential foreign buyer. And these private returns from exporting activities would be lower than the corresponding social return. So investment in those searches would be lower than socially optimal. And therefore, that might be rational for public interventions that aim at correcting this form of market failure. So what governments have done around the world? Well, they have tried to address these information problems and the associated market failures through the trade promotion policies, which typically are assigned to specialized or dedicated agencies. Now, we're talking about trade promotion. One important thing to do here is to have a common understanding of what trade promotion is and what's not. I always, when I came to this point, I always like to refer to a very nice book by Pirandello, where you have different. The book is 6 characters looking for an author, no? And the thing is, they are talking about things they believe is the same because they are using the same word, but in the end, they are talking about different things because the meaning of the word is different for the different people. And when you talk about people about trade promotion, everybody understands a different thing. So it's subsidies, it's, I don't know, free trade zones. So here we'll talk about trade promotion as a set of activities to help firms overcome internationalization in primary information-related obstacles. And what are those activities? Provision of data on general export process. So if I need to export from my country, what I need to do? What are the specific markets abroad? What are the business contacts they're in? They disseminate information on domestic firms' products and services. They assist the firms in preparation and follow-ups in their participation in international marketing events such as fairs and missions, which, by the way, are not longer held now, and everything is virtual. If you talk to trade promotion organizations, they move to virtual. So you have virtual fairs, virtual missions, and now virtual bilateral business meetings. What trade promotion wouldn't be here, these are policies that involve directly providing firms with financial resources. We are talking about subsidies, like those associated with export requirements, export credit guarantees, production, innovation, and training subsidies, which are not attached directly to export, but might affect export. So I hope we have a common understanding, and based on that, we can move forward. So let's see, to start with, what we know about the effects of trade promotion, defined as the way we define it. So let me tell you a visual story about the trade promotion literature. That was before the 2000s. There were 2 countries, basically Canada and Austria, where there was some evidence based on firm-level data. This evidence was based on sample of firms, small sample of firms. Then we jump till the second part of the 2000s, and at the bank we started a line of research doing that for a number of Latin American countries, and you see that the number is increasing, and we start working with population of firms in the economy, so the population of exporters, essentially. So now, this is how it looks like now. It's 20 years after the beginning. So we have studies in basically the entire South America, even in Central America, there is in North America, there is in Europe, and a lot of countries in Europe. There is 1 country in Africa, and there is also in Asia. So now we have plenty of evidence. I mean, it's not as much as we would like to have, and you will see why, but we have plenty of evidence about the effectiveness of these kind of policies. So what's what are the main findings from all these papers? So let me summarize and say the following. Firm-level trade promotion support has a positive and significant effect on firm-level exports. That's very common. I would say it's ubiquitous result in all these papers. The size of the estimated effects tend to be larger when the type of trade of the type of firm is likely to face more severe information problems, and when this is the case? Well, for example, you are a domestic firm trying to venture abroad for the first time. Then you don't know anything about the export market, so information barriers will be very large for you. Or if you're already exporting, but you want to enter a new market, either in terms of products or in terms of destinations, then you will again face important information barriers. These frictions are also important when export consists of differentiated goods. I know that I can imagine that we have people familiar with this concept, but just to understand what we are talking about here, imagine that you want to buy oil. You want to buy oil, you go to the newspaper and you have the reference price, all the different types, and you know what's about. It's oil and you have the price. Now, imagine that now you want to buy shoes. And then I tell you, okay, the pair of shoes, the price of the pair of shoes is $100. And I would say, would you like to buy it? And then you will ask me, well, it depends. It's a designer shoes, it's a mass production shoes, it's plastic, it's leather. You will need significant amount of additional information on top of the price to make an economic decision. This is the kind of goods we are talking about when we refer to differentiated goods. And then finally, firms that are smaller and had less previous exposure to international markets are those that face these large information barriers. Now, there are new studies showing that trade promotion can help firms weather financial crises. We did a study a few years ago where we showed that during the financial crisis, in 2008, 2010, supported firms were generally more likely to survive in the export market. And in particular, they were more likely to continue exporting to countries hit by the financial crisis. One of the ways that trade promotion helped those firms is by allowing to switch buyers. Imagine that there is a crisis in a destination and some of your buyers disappear due to bankruptcy. What you have here is that the trade promotion agencies can help the firms find new buyers in this context. And then there is a very important question that we may raise later on and discuss, where the effect of trade promotion is durable. There is a paper, a very interesting paper by Olivier Cadoyle and some colleagues at the World Bank showing that there is evidence that supported firms and non-supported firms achieve the same export performance after a number of years. So apparently the effect doesn't survive. Now, we have conducted, and Jerónimo has conducted an analysis for Peru, and we found the opposite. So the effect is persistent. That might have to do with the fact that the programs are different. The program in the paper by Olivier and his colleagues is based on Tunisia. It's the FAMEX program. It's a program that provides firms with resources to hire consultants. Now, the problem you have there is that there might be heterogeneity in the trade promotion service because of the different qualities of the consultants. In the case of Peru, you have a single entity that trains officials in a consistent way, and you will have less heterogeneity, and they will know what they will be doing. And in the first case, you might even have problems because the firms who doesn't know how to trade need to know, for the program to be effective and have persistent effects, know who to hire, who is a good who can provide a good service. And that's also an information problem that probably the firms are not in the position to solve. And to conclude this part, let me mention two things. First, the positive effects are not confined to exports. There is evidence that trade promotion has affected positively firm sales, employment, worker productivity, particularly in smaller firms. And this is a very nice paper by Jakob Munch and Georg Schauer showing that. And then there is something which is, when we talk about trade policies, we always look at one policy at a time, which is nice because we have the data for that policy. But all these policies interact with each other, and we always forget about that. So what we saw is that the positive effects are larger when policies and public assistance programs are properly coordinated. And I have two examples. One, Imagine that you have an agency supporting a firm to venture abroad for the first time, but then the shipment got stopped at the custom because there's a new firm and the risk management system stopped the shipment. The shipment arrives late, and then the buyer says, I don't know why this arrives late. It's first time and you already missed the delivery. I don't want to buy you anymore, or I will buy you from you less. No, so what we find, and there is evidence for 2 countries in Latin America, delays generated by border agencies processing of shipments can undo partially or completely the positive effects of trade promotion. And then the second one is that firms that previously participated in innovation promotion programs were more able to benefit from subsequent trade promotion support than firms that only use trade promotion or use both programs simultaneously. That shows the importance of coordination of programs, but also the importance of sequencing the programs in the right way. So one word on this. Given that we have all this body of knowledge about trade promotion from research, we can move from research to practice. And that's important because combined with cost side consideration, the findings provide valuable inputs for the design of more effective trade promotion strategies. In order to adjust this strategy over time, and that's important because the needs of the firms evolve, agencies must perform periodic impact evaluation, both in general and for specific programs. And to support Latin American and Caribbean Trade Promotion Organization in dealing with this challenge, at the bank we have developed an automated impact evaluation tool that features the baseline impact evaluation methods. Difference in difference and much in difference. So what we are talking about here, and I will show you in 2 slides. So this is an app. So this is an app that is available for the agencies in the region. You basically need to prepare the data in some specific way. That there is also a supplementary app that does it. And then you can choose the parameters, times, the indicators, and this app will produce a report like that, a report with the result of the estimation. This is in Spanish, but just believe me, so what we are explaining there, it's the results of the impact evaluations. So basically you have the data, as an agency, you have the data of all exporting firms in your country, you have a well systematized your register of assisted firms over time, and if you have more data, even better, and then you can combine this and run these regressions with this app. And of course, behind this app, there is, I don't know how many thousands of lines of programming, but that's behind the scenes. So let me tell you in the last part of the presentation what we don't know about trade promotion. We don't know many things, but today we will focus on one particular thing. And we will focus on the indirect effects of other firms' economic outcomes. And why this is important? Because exporting firms are not only larger in terms of employments and sales, they buy substantially more and from a larger number of domestic sellers. And let me show you data from Uruguay. What you see here is the distribution of purchases, domestic purchases by type of firm. What we have here are exporters in red, non-exporters in black. And you see that the kernel density, so the distribution of the sales of exporters, the domestic purchases of exporters is shift to the right and stochastically dominates the one for the non-export. So they buy more. It's not only that, they buy from more buyers. Yeah, this is the number of buyers, the distribution of the number of buyers for exporting firms and non-exporting firms. Now, do you want to see how does it look like in the economy? Looks like that. So this is for a particular sector. This is the food sector in Uruguay, which is, of course, a very important sector. It accounts for, if I remember correctly, 40% of total exports in the country. But what you see there is the red points are linkages with exporting firms and the black ones with non-exporting firms. You can see that exporting firms, the red dots, have a lot of connections with a lot of firms, yeah? And they are very important. Now, how does it look like, say, in reality? Now, this should have some implication, no? Because exporting firms have broad networks of input-output relationships. They are connected with a large number of domestic firms. So given these deep connections of exporting firms with the domestic economy, the natural question we may ask is whether and how linking up with exporting firms affects domestic firms' performance. And this is precisely the question we try to answer with the new study I would like to share with you in these last minutes. So what do we do in this study? We assess whether and how firms engaging in exporting affect the performance of their non-exporting counterparts they are linked to. So there are three main questions, not all well answered at this stage, I would admit. What are the effects of firm exporting on total sales, number of employees, and sales per employee of their domestic suppliers? To what extent are these effects heterogeneous? For example, by the size of the supplier or by the type of the relationship. And that's something which is important we need to work more on, which is what are the mechanisms behind these observed effects. So how do we answer these questions? We first apply difference in difference, but then we move to apply instrumental variables. What do we use as an instrument for the exporting activity of a firm? So a firm that becomes an exporter in the country, we use trade promotion. Trade promotion is related to the fact that it's directly related to the export status of a firm, but is otherwise unrelated to the fact that the supplier may or not improve its performance in terms of sales, number of employees. There is no reason why trade promotion will affect the performance of a supplier, but through the export status of the firm. So, and we use a unique data set from Uruguay. It's a unique data set, so we combine a lot of data here. So it combines annual firm level data, transaction level data from multiple sources that allow us to characterize the population of firms in the economy in terms of sales, employment, age, location. At some extent, we are missing a part, sector of activity, and other attributes. We have BIT data, firm-to-firm BIT data that allow us to map the connections between firms in the economy through sales and purchases. We have customs data at the transaction level, which in this case we use in a very simple way, just to establish the export and import status of firms. And we can measure, based on data from the trade promotion organization, the trade promotion assistance status of the firm. So now the last part is to show you a few results. This is just distribution of firms. No, this is distribution of sales for different kinds of firms. We have on black firms that don't sell to exporters. We have in light red firms that sell to exporters, and then we have in dark red firms that sells to new exporters. Not only to new exporters, but sells to exporters, which include new exporters. And what you see here is basically that firms that sell to exporters and new exporters, both of them, the distribution of the sales is shifted to the right in all cases. So it's again dominates the other ones. But this is descriptive evidence, you will call it. Now, what we did is show you just a few graphs with the results from OLS and IEV. And just to go through quickly here, this is for sales, this is for numbers of employees, and this is for sales per employee. And basically what you see is in all cases, you have a positive and significant effect. And the size might depend on how you define the linkage and the export status of the firm. But if you want to be very, very strict, the one you will look at always is the one at the bottom of the figures. So we are considering linkages in the previous period, and then in the current period, there is a firm you were linked to in the previous period that now you still are connected to, and this firm becomes an exporter. Yeah? So what you see is that when that happens, you were connected with the firm and still connected with the firm, and the firm was not an exporter, but now is an exporter, there is a positive and significant effect on your sales, on your number of employees, and your sales per employee if you are a supplier of that firm. And what you see in here is that the effects are essentially heterogeneous. In terms of sales, especially, what you see is that the effect decreases as the size of the supplier increases. So basically, smaller suppliers are the ones that benefit the most from the export engagement of the peers. Just to summarize, firms engaging in exporting is associated with a significant increase in their supplier sales, number of employees, and sales per employee. I didn't go into the details. We can discuss about the technicalities if you wish, but we did the diff in diff, we did IB, we control for many things, and we can discuss what are those controls. We estimated that the increase in sales, employment, and sales per employee is larger when the domestic supplier tends to be smaller, the exporting firm is larger. I didn't show that, but it's in the paper. The linkage intensity is higher, and the linkage is vertical. So it's you are in different sectors, not in the same sectors. There are many things you need to work on. One of those is the mechanism. So we need to work more on the mechanism. We need to work more on the identification, because you always can claim that the linkage is not exogenous either. So, and then we will need to find an instrument for that, and we are working on that. So I don't want to overwhelm you with the technical details. And just to conclude, since given the nature of this webinar, let's talk about policy. That has important implications for trade promotion policies. Trade promotion programs can have significant indirect effects in addition to their positive direct effect on supported firms' export outcomes. Such indirect effects are not typically considered, but should be factored in when assessing the cost effectiveness of these policies initiative. Because typically the question, the number they tell you is, I invest $1 in a trade promotion and generate some amount of additional exports. And that's a ratio. Well, no, there are additional effects that needs to be taken into account. And finally, this should be incorporated into the design of the policies, not only trade promotion policies, but also in other policies that are related, like innovation promotion programs and even linkages programs, because there might be synergies that you as a policymaker would like to take advantage of. And with that, I conclude. I thank you very much for your attention.
Thanks, Christian. That's a really great presentation. I think we've got a ton of material to go through there. So I'm really glad that you did sort of the review section at the beginning, because I think it situates the work really nicely. We've got a few questions there, both in chat and in Q&A, which we'll take up later. But let me hand over now to Andrea for her discussion comments.
Okay, great. Thanks, Ben. Thanks, Anna. Thanks, Hannah. Thanks, Christian, also. Let me share my screen here. Working now. I'm wearing corduroy pants. This is very similar to velour, I think, but it's also very classical, maybe the academic style.
Thank you, Andrea, for bringing up that most important point first.
Supporting this very crucial point before I start to praise Christian.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Good. So thanks for the opportunity to discuss this really interesting paper and following up on this great presentation here. So let me just, sorry, somehow it's stuck, but yeah, now it's working. So just a very quick outline. I'm of course going to summarize a bit of what Christian said here, but I think I will put my main focus on the policy relevance and maybe give you some outlook. So let's start here. I mean, although Christian gave a really nice and comprehensive overview over like the international dimension of trade promotion and the effects thereof and so on, in the end he was talking about Uruguay. And so this brings me a bit to the context, right? So we have Uruguay here as a a smaller country in the region. And so in that sense, it might be particularly important for a country like this, right, to have an idea on the effects of trade promotion, given that it might be particularly looking for opportunities to trade growth, right? And so actually that was what large parts of the presentation were also about. So this growth along the extensive margin, I guess, in some implicit way. Now, he had very nice contributions along several dimensions, right? And so several questions actually are very relevant or have been relevant in the literature. And I mean, the first two, so let me state this just on a very general level only, would be the question whether linkages with exporters in general can actually help some domestic suppliers to directly improve the performance, right? And then they went on and they asked this question and extended this question into whether, in addition, there are any indirect effects actually from exporting on domestic suppliers. And then these direct and indirect effects, in fact, for the domestic suppliers can, of course, also be evaluated from a perspective of trade policymakers. And so that's why we are here today, I guess. And so I think that's the main contribution here in this context, I would say. Now, for me as a data nerd, I would say this this paper also has some big innovations because of the data efforts, right, that were involved. So Christian didn't really show that and didn't really highlight that, but of course, I think we can praise this in length. Now, so what are the takeaways from this presentation? So what they observed was basically that exporting was, or that they observed like a significant increase in the sales of domestic suppliers, right? In their size, right? So sales per employee and so on, following some engagement in exporting here. Now, as we saw, he shed light on the magnitude of these effects, right? Which depended on the size of the domestic supplier, the exporting firm, and then also the intensity of the linkage, but also the direction, right? So whether the linkage is vertical, so it's coming from a different sector, or horizontal, coming from the same sector in that sense. In addition to this, right? So they found that that both the direct and the indirect effects from export promotion programs are very important. They're very significant. Yeah, and so actually he just started to summarize that in the end, right? So they should be factored in when we assess cost effectiveness of trade promotion initiatives, and they should be taken into account when we design such policies, importantly. So now let me talk maybe a bit about what this actually means and which interesting insights this paper could offer to us in that sense. And one which seems particularly relevant to me is that actually using this kind of microdata allow us to analyze the heterogeneity of these effects along very important dimensions here. One of these dimensions is obviously size, and Christian was also talking about in some detail, no? So here my experience at the OECD comes in. I've been brainwashed with the term inclusive growth in a sense, right? In maybe more general terms, let me state that actually these insights seem extremely important to me along these lines, right, of ensuring, in fact, that that gains from trade and so on can be reaped by larger populations of firms, right? Not just exporters and so on. So I think it is, in fact, important that we do know something about the characteristics which determine these effects. Yeah? And so let me just maybe state, so small and middle-sized enterprises, for example, are at the core of some of these initiatives. And so, in fact, we do want to know something about that. And so Christian found some stuff here, right, which was quite interesting. And I've summarized it here again, but let me just be brief about it. So they found that linkages with exporters have more pronounced impacts on domestic firms, which are at the lower end of the size distribution. So something that goes a bit in the direction of what I just said. Now, effects were also larger for links with larger exporters, when firms sell to more than one exporter, and when these linkages are vertical. So let me come though to another but very related point, because I think that this kind of research sort of opens up some new avenues for research, right? If data allow for it and if data are available, as we may even want to know more about this heterogeneity, right? So and I think, Christian, you mentioned a lot of these things in the beginning. So you were saying, for example, important determinants are firm size, productivity. You were also mentioning the degree of differentiation of goods, right? So how sophisticated are the goods? You told us something about that the effects of trade promotion, which were in fact stronger for such differentiated goods, right? So here, I think even in the in this setting here, I think that allows for some interesting findings. And then finally, maybe something that is also a bit particular to the kind of research that I'm engaged in. So what's the role of communication, of culture and language? And you were actually mentioning this nice example. People want the contact, right? When they seek somebody, when they seek to open up new trade avenues, new trading partners, and so on. And so maybe these are some of the determinants. Finally, I think what maybe some of you in the audience might ask, how do we compare these findings to other economies, right? So countries, for example, who have might have the same size as Uruguay, but have a different mix of goods that they export. Uruguay is very specialized in food manufacturing, as we saw, but it could, of course, be interesting as well for larger countries. No, not only in the area, but also. That's a bit that. Now, Christian has explained us this very nice graph. Let me come back to it very quickly. I think I don't need to explain so much about it. I mean, just it was really fantastic to see, right? So that we visualize sort of this pattern of smaller and also peripheral domestic firms, which are non-exporters here in black, that are clustered around this strong core, right, of the larger exporters here, which we see in the center in red here. And this actually brought me to an idea where I think this policy relevance of this question becomes very obvious. And it's a bit linked to the approach that the authors chose in this paper. So let me talk about regional and urban policy. Although we are in a trade policy audience, I think we cannot highlight the importance of this enough. So of course, from the graph, we don't see anything about location, right? But still, I mean, when we are asking about changes in employment, in export employment, we normally in regional and urban policy use something which is called the employment multiplier, right? So what we do want to know at a local level, but maybe not restricted to such, is in fact, what's the effect of a change in export employment on total employment? Yeah, and this can come actually through this effect of the increased exports on domestic suppliers in our case here, right? Which then in turn generates increases in demand at the local, at the regional level, and so on. And so basically, these employment multipliers are a really relevant tool in regional and urban policy. So, for example, they allow us to ask the question, what effects stem from local employment and economic, what local employment and economic effects stem from trade policy, right? Given the fiscal costs, what's the net effect of this policy at this level? And we can not only look at employment effects, which is what you, Christian, did here, but we may even evaluate the net effects on some regional demand here, right? So which is really far beyond trade policy of interest for everybody engaged a bit in economic policy in general. So I think that's the really nice implication that this paper allows us to shed first light on. Now let me come to an end here. I think a few other questions are maybe pertinent. They could not be answered in the paper, but there's maybe room for discussion right now. So of course we all know that that there are a lot of dynamics, in fact, in trade. GVCs are strongly evolving, right? We see the servitization of trade. Digital trade is playing a big role or increasing role, automation and so on. And so, so basically, right, here these trends might in fact imply that trade promotion could be more effective if we accompanied by structural policies, right, which tackle these issues here. So the question is, right, so do we find, or could we find some joint effect of these trade promotion policies together with others? A second question actually relates to the time frame for such promotion policies. And so here, I'm not a big expert. I think Christian is much more here. So of course, you could ask the question, right, are they best suited as temporary policies, assisting new firms in infant industries, firms diversifying the set of trading partners, or is that like a really appropriate permanent tool? So maybe there's no fits-all strategy in that sense here, but I think still the question is a bit relevant. And then lastly, of course, trade promotion may in fact pose an even more valuable tool, right? For example, as we have recent unfortunate events like COVID, or also some trade wars, right? Which actually, so trade tension, for example, could require you to open up new trade avenues with other trading partners, and hence this could prove like a relevant tool in sort of trade diversion in that sense. And I think here it's maybe quite relevant to know two things here. So are such instruments actually also effective in the short term? For example, to tackle problems like the ones that come along with COVID, and then also how strategic or how targeted can we design trade promotion policies? And that's maybe a bit relevant when it comes to these other points. And I think that's it. So ready to hand over again, and many thanks for this.
Okay, thanks so much, Andrea. Those were really great comments. We've got about sort of 10 minutes left for discussion. Maybe Christian, I can just ask you first if there's anything you'd like to respond to in Andrea's comments, just really quickly, you know, in 1
Sure.
minute.
Sure, Ben, thank you. So Andrea, thank you very much for the comments. So very helpful, very interesting. Yes, in classic growth is definitely something very relevant also for the bank. And one of the new institutional pillars for the bank is SMEs. So we would like to know what's the impact of these kind of linkages with SMEs. And that's something that we can explore more in depth, definitely. And we need to go more in depth into the heterogeneous effects, not only in terms of size, but you mentioned differentiation. And we didn't do anything about it here. And this is also related to the other point you made, which is communication and information costs. So that there may be heterogeneous effects along all these dimensions, and we need to explore them. External validity, yes, of course. I mean, Uruguay is a small, open country. I don't know where results will help in Peru, which is a different kind of country. It's larger, specialized in mining. So we plan to, as provided we get the data, to do similar analysis in other countries. That's what we are trying right now. The employment multiplier is a great idea. And regional urban policies, and probably Ben and remembers that it's part of my previous life. So I also like that a lot, and we will try to incorporate it. We have a more problem with the location data because it's not complete, but we are working to incorporate that into the analysis. And we'll follow definitely your suggestion because they are very useful from a policy point of view. People at the bank will love it, people at the countries will love it. And all the last points, I mean, all of them are relevant. So just let me mention two of them. Services. So you mentioned certification. So let's go one step before and let's talk about services. There are basically no single paper doing impact evaluation of trade promotion programs on services. There might be a few of them now emerging. Now, many of these agencies support firms that export services. So you don't know what you are doing and how well you are doing with a significant fraction of your firms. That's a big problem, no? It's a big problem. Now, in the region, it's not like in Belgium, like the nice paper by André Ariu, this Belgium central bank data, he likes to call it the gold standard, and I agree with that. In the region, there are only a few countries that have direct services export data. I know the case of Ecuador, and I know the case of Colombia. because these are data that are asked in the BIT declaration. It's explicitly, you ask the firms, how much services do you export? How much services do you import? So we are working right now, we are getting there to work with Ecuador. So we will have some direct data. In other countries, we are working indirectly because there is no way that you can know the data. You don't know the figure, you have to compute it. And the way we are doing that is combining information, like for example, in Uruguay, information from the tax agency, which you have the total amount of sales, regardless of it is goods or services, and then you have the custom data, which is only goods. And then by subtraction and making some assumptions, you can come up with a figure. Yeah, that's what we are doing. It's a very important point. Digitalization is crucial, and firm needs to move online. They need to learn how to do it, and agencies are trying to help them, to help the firms doing that. They are trying to do that. In some agencies that even have created marketplaces. I don't know what's a good idea. We can discuss about that, because whether you have to create your own marketplace or use a marketplace that is out there. It's a matter of discussion. Temporary or permanent tool, it's definitely temporary. You will not support firms 20 years, but probably it's not just one. And one of the things I want to mention is that we are about to publish a blog where we use 25 years of transaction level data from Peru. So it's a quarter of a century of transaction level data for Peru, where we follow firms over time. And what we find is there are a lot of small firms, very tiny firms at the beginning, that grew a lot over time and account for a significant fraction of the total export growth in the country. And a non-trivial fraction of those firms was supported at the very beginning several times by the trade promotion organization. You can see some figures where you see the export profile is like that, no? And then a support, and then there's a jump, no? And the firm becomes a top exporter. So it's a kind of, I would say it's a descriptive evidence yet, but there seems to be something there that needs to be explored more in depth. And the last one is targeting. Agencies need to work more carefully on targeting. I will just mention one anecdote. When I started working on that many years ago, I went to talk to many of the CEOs of the agencies in Latin America. And I will tell you one case, I will not mention the country, but the thing was like that. So I asked the person, do you have priority sectors? Do you have priority countries? And the answer was yes. It was, okay, fine. So you have a targeted policy. My next question, so how did you choose? Well, honestly, the answer was, I have no idea. I got the list from some part of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and we are implementing the list. So, well, no, you have plenty of micro data. You have plenty of country level data, sector level data that at least you can use to better target the policies. And agencies are starting to move in this direction, but clearly much more needs to be done. And I stop here because we can I allow them to discuss other questions.
Yeah, that's great. No, I think thank you for taking up those couple of points. So services in particular was one that had also come up in chat. So I'm really glad that you answered that. If I can maybe mix two questions that I was having, you know, one is sort of taking up this targeting point that you mentioned, but thinking about it in a different way, because when you talk to some of the international organizations that are involved in supporting trade promotion efforts around the world, you know, one thing that they tend to do is to mix the agenda of trade promotion with the agenda for support for micro, small and medium enterprises. And the way that it gets mixed is that we have this idea that we should be using trade promotion directly with micro, small and medium enterprises. And I'm just wondering if your research sort of tells us that we should question that a little bit, because we know that most, particularly, you know, micro and small enterprises, they're a long way from the threshold of exporting. Getting them up there is very, very hard. But what you're saying is that there can still be all of these indirect effects as kind of first-tier suppliers. So, you know, from a targeting perspective, does that tell us that we should be focusing more on development of supplier linkages domestically rather than trying to get small firms exporting? That's part one of the question. then part two of the question is that, when I was visualizing, I think helped by your graph there that Andrea showed, the network graph, what you guys have really got is a firm level IO table. I mean, you've merged, I'm a data nerd as well. So I was kind of in awe of all the merging that you've done to try and get these things to talk to each other. But I wonder if you can push this a little further and say, in addition to kind of first tier supplier relationships, we're going to use input-output techniques. So thinking of a Leontief inverse, some version of that, to say these are all the linkages that we get through kind of N steps of the supply chain. Sort of picking up Andrea's point about how do we think about this in terms of GVCs. So just wondering if you've got any thoughts on those sorts of points.
Thank you, and they are great points. So first one, so the small farms. Yes, the problem is when you want to target. So one of the questions you want to answer when you do impact evaluation is whether the instrument is well targeted or not. And you cannot do trade promotion to a micro farm in the middle of the jungle in Peru. I mean, it's not ready to export. We know that. The thing is, two things. Countries have business development programs, which is they are targeted to those farms. The problem is that these programs are not linked to trade promotion. They are like, they don't talk to each other, but there is a sequence, no? So they should be coordinated. They should talk to each other. So you have a development agency, then you have a trade promotion organization, then they have the programs. So there should be kind of it's a schooling of the farms, and then when they reach a certain threshold, they can do it. Now, but let me answer a question from a different point of view, which also relates to the second question. Because yes, you can do that, and you can use the information to define or to design your policies. So there should be programs for linkages, because there is information frictions. There are information frictions also within the country. I mean, there might not be as severe as those across borders, but there are information frictions. So, but then the thing is, what we saw in a different paper is that when the linkages occur, these domestic firms that were not exporting become exporters. So let me tell you the sequence that we saw in a different paper, because in that paper we look at the multinational firms. So we put the lenses on multinational firms, and what we see is the following: domestic firms that start to selling to a multinational firm become more likely to become an exporter, direct exporter. So they were not exporters, they link with a multinational, and then they become direct exporters. But this is not everything. You can go one step before, and the step before is like that. If you're a domestic firm selling to an exporting domestic firm in your country, then you are more likely to export, to sell to a multinational firm located in your country, and then you are more likely to become a direct exporter. There is a sequence, apparently, in the internationalization process of firms. That should be factored in the design of the programs. Yes, there are spillovers going down. Now, you have to take that into account, the design of the program, to maximize the impact of international trade and foreign direct investment in the economy. You can do it. And yes, we can go in the direction you suggested. Yes, this is the first tier. We can go deeper. Definitely. Yes.
Great. Let me maybe just, we're running slightly over time, but I think it's a really interesting topic. So let's just do one more sort of quick question. This came up in chat, and I think it picks up again on one of Andrea's comments. It's really interesting to break out this heterogeneity that you find in the results. And so one question that we had in chat is, can you say anything about, the ownership of these supplier firms, and in particular, the gender dimension of ownership? Do we see anything interesting happening there, and does it tell us anything again about this targeting question?
Yeah, it's a great question. So unfortunately, not in terms of gender. I would reply that specific, and I would love to do that. The problem we face is that we'll need an additional database, which is the data from the Social Security. I mean, I have been at the bank for now over 15 years, and I have tried to get access to that database for more than a decade. So in the case of Uruguay, no? So I would love to do that. And not only that, because I think that Andrea raised a very important point, which is inclusive growth. And that's something that needs to be examined, not only in terms of gender, so the impact across gender, but also in some countries you have minority groups. No, and some of them, you know, that they are lag behind and needs to be considered. They need to be considered. We need to understand what's the impact of trade and foreign direct investment on those group of the population, because as Andrea was saying, that she worked at the OECD and we met there at some point. They have this sentence say, we need to make trade work for all, and that's something that needs to be done. Definitely needs to be done, because it's an interest, it's in the interest of the welfare of the society. So we need for everybody to be part of this. And that's the only way to do it. So we plan to do that as soon as we get the data, no? And the other thing you need to take into account is that there might be biases in the policies that or the programs you are implementing and you don't know. That's something important. For example, we are about to publish in June a new report on investment promotion. And even though with some limitation, what we did using microdata, we have data of assistance from 12 investment promotion agencies in the country, so firm level data. And then what we did is try to see where there was some bias in terms of gender, for example. In terms of are they assisting firms in sector where women are a significantly larger share of the workforce or not? And we didn't see any bias, which was at least a good news in terms of, because typically what you see is the other way around, no? So you see, I'm care about gender, I'm care about climate change, but then when you implement the policy, it's the other way around. It's like you're supporting firms in sectors that are male-oriented, that contaminate a lot. But unfortunately, we find that there is no bias. And in some cases, we find that in investment promotion, the impact was larger in sectors where female are more important, which is definitely good news.
Yeah, that's great. Look, thank you so much for going into that. I think, you know, if I can just sort of wrap it up a little bit, I mean, I think what we get out of this is, you know, that it's a really nice example of sort of building this bridge, which is what we're trying to do with the forum. So, you know, again, as a data nerd, I had the reaction that Andrea had when she was hearing about this, which is, my God, think of all the data work that they're he's summarizing in one slide, just saying we took these data sets and put them together. So that it's a huge amount of work. But, you know, as your, I think, last response indicates, there's a ton more that we need to do. There are so many interesting questions out there, and it's really just a question, and I think it's even come up in chat again. You know, even countries that are going a long way down the path of promoting trade and gender in their agreements, they don't necessarily have the basic data that we need to know what sort of job we're doing with that. Are we giving voice to our implicit biases without knowing it? Are we doing something that we shouldn't be doing? And when we do things that we think are helping, are they helping the people that we want to help most? So I think those kinds of questions are the sorts of things, you know, you've given us a good sense of how we can go about answering that, provided that we've got the data. So look, thank you so much, both to Christian and also to Andrea for, I think, a really fascinating session. So it's a great example of some really nice empirical work of the type that we really enjoy here at the forum. Let me just wrap up by giving people a heads up about our next couple of events. May, as we said at the outset, is going to be very busy for us. We've got 2 events instead of our usual one. On May 6th, we've got a career session. So it's specifically aimed at people who want to get started in a trade policy career. So we're going to talk to people from the international agencies, from government and from the private sector, to ask them a little bit about how they got started, but also to ask, you know, when they're recruiting, what are they looking for? What sort of things can people do to try and get into this world? So that's on May 6th, as always, at 9 a.m. US Eastern Time. And then on May 20th, we've got a session on blockchain. So looking at how blockchain is changing trade. Two great presenters, Alyssa DiCaprio from R3, which is a blockchain firm, and Emmanuel Gann from WTO. So it should be a really fascinating presentation. I'm looking forward to learning a lot. Blockchain is something that I hear about all the time, and I think I've got a long way to go before I really understand it. So if you're interested in these couple of areas, please do come and join us on May 6th and on May 20th. With that, thanks to everyone. Thanks, Christian, Andrea. Thanks, Hannah, as well, for being with us. We'll post the slides and the recording on forum.org in the coming days. So thanks, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your week.